In his essay, The Way to Wealth, published in 1758, Benjamin Franklin expresses 6 ideas that would become core principles of the American mindset. And those ideas are populism, the free market, industriousness, social mobility, liberty, and independence. So in the first paragraph of the essay, Franklin explains that though he had become a popular author by this time, particularly with his publishing of almanacs, he says over the past 25 years leading up to 1758, but despite that, he wasn't very well respected by the literary elite. But rather than be discouraged by that, he says he ended up not being discouraged because his writings produced for him, quote, some solid pudding. In other words, he was commercially successful. And then he concludes that the people were the best judge of my merit. So that's the first of those principles, this populist attitude that where we take seriously the opinion of the common person rather than always bowing to the opinion of the elite or the supposed experts, etc. Part of that sort of healthy American skepticism of the elite is the skepticism towards fancy rhetoric. We have a number of sayings that express this kind of distrust of words. Actions speak louder than words. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Talk is cheap. Just 3 off the top of my head. Or in Franklin's case here, he says, a word to the wise is enough. In other words, just one word is enough to the wise. And many words won't fill a bushel. Again, it's like a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing. So now one of the ironies of this is that while Franklin expresses this skepticism towards words, he, to a large degree, made his living on words, and he was a master with words. In fact, a number of the popular adages that we still repeat today are from Franklin. So some of them you might have heard. He says, there will be sleeping enough in the grave. You might have heard that as there will be time enough to sleep after I die. And that expresses actually the third of those principles, industriousness, working hard to better yourself. In the next essay, we're going to cover information to those who had removed to America. Franklin really elaborates more on that principle of social mobility, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps through hard work. And so this, there will be sleeping enough in the grave. Franklin was a big proponent of working hard. What the sociologist Max Weber would a century or so later would call the Protestant work ethic, seeing work not as an evil, but actually as work as being morally good. Franklin definitely espoused that idea. The second of those 6 principles, the free market, I skipped over that, but you see this in where he says that the people were the best judges of my merit, and they're the ones who, on the free market, doesn't matter what the critics say, the people ultimately decide with their pocketbooks. How many of you have ever gone to a movie and you just love the movie, and maybe it was a blockbuster movie, and then it got really terrible reviews by the supposed experts? That's kind of what he's talking about here. So some more of these witticisms that Franklin is known for. Early to bed and early to rise make a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Again, There's that principle of industriousness, the Protestant work ethic. There are no gains without pains, or the way we say it these days, no pain, no gain. You often hear people say that at the gym, working out. And then, he that hath a trade hath an estate. That one's, in part because of the language, doesn't seem quite as immediate to us. But basically what he's saying here is that, in the old model of feudalism and in the monarchies of Europe, people who had wealth typically, first of all, they typically inherited it, and they were, it was a birth privilege. They were born in an aristocratic family, and so they inherited typically land, and so therefore a great estate. That's how people would accumulate and maintain wealth. But Franklin says here, in America, he that hath a trade hath an estate. In other words, the way to wealth in what would become America, or the United States of America, was to have marketable skills, to have skills where you could do a service or create a product that on the free market, other people would buy. And that was the way to wealth, more so than the old model of just inheriting your wealth through land or estates. Again, Franklin's going to elaborate on that more in Information of Those Who Had Removed to America, the next essay we'll discuss. So that takes us to the next quote I wanted to point out. Where Franklin says, a plowman on his legs is higher than a gentleman on his knees. So in other words, a common farmer standing on his own 2 feet, independent, working for his own living, is actually higher than a gentleman. In other words, someone who's born wealthy and who has more wealth, but he's on his knees in the sense that he's dependent on others for that wealth. Again, a very American idea. The word gentleman, we use the word these days when we do use it to mean just being polite, having good manners. But the word gentleman at this time was more of a label of social status and socioeconomic status. If you were a gentleman, that means you were of noble birth. You were of the aristocracy. So here Franklin says, better, a plowman on his legs is higher than a gentleman on his knees. And Franklin's own life bears that out. He was not born in an aristocratic family. He was born in basically a working class family, and he really did embody the American dream of going from rags to riches based on his own ingenuity, his own work ethic, his own merit. And so that leads us to the last page, where Franklin gives some economic or some financial advice that we would be wise to follow these days. Unfortunately, very few, if any of us have, including me. And that is, he says, the borrower is a slave to the lender, and the debtor to the creditor. So here he's warning against debt. If any of you have ever heard of Dave Ramsey, financial advisor who preaches about the dangers of debt and helps people become debt free. But we were addicted to debt, in our contemporary American society, whether it's debt from student loans, mortgage debt, and the government is trillions of dollars in debt, and not only no end in sight, but just continuing to pile it on. So Franklin, if he would be here, if he were to time travel here today, I think that would definitely be something that would shock him and really kind of disgust him, actually. So he says, instead of being a slave to debt, disdain the chain. Don't be a slave to debt. Disdain the chain. Preserve your freedom. So there's the fifth principle here, freedom, liberty. And maintain your independency. Be industrious and free. Be frugal and free. That's another principle I didn't mention, but he definitely advised frugality rather than spending spending a lot of money and time on trivial things. So, and of course those principles, particularly those last two of freedom and independence, Franklin here is talking about those on a personal level, on an individual level, but those would become two of the central principles that would inspire the American Revolution, where the colonies themselves collectively would seek their own liberty and independence from England.